Welcome to Creating Communication Partners, AAC for Community Providers, presented by Melinda Simon from Hanover County Public Schools.
So if you think about it, communication is going to happen everywhere. So if children are using AAC devices, they need to take their AAC everywhere and be comfortable in using it with the entire population. And so they have to find communication partners, not just in their home or school, but at Krispy Kreme. They need some communication partners that will reach out to them when they go to Target or the pool. And so even the different places where they might not feel the most comfortable, like the doctor's office or the dentist's office or a hospital, they need to have the opportunity to take their AAC and feel comfortable communicating. And we're going to show some tips today in how you can make them feel more comfortable with your daily interactions with children. And so let's sort of go over first, why is it hard for all children to communicate? They're learning new words all the time. Their vocabulary is increasing. The sentences are getting longer as they go along, and they're understanding new concepts. The language and the social constraints that a child might have, they might not be totally familiar with everything they might do. That's why all of a sudden we hear bathroom being yelled at in very inconspicuous places. So you also have them using language across different settings. So this is just for typical developing children to really communicate. Think about what it means for a child that might have a language impairment, or maybe selective mutism, autism, maybe a traumatic brain injury. It makes it more complicated for them to communicate. So when that happens, what can we do to support students with communication difficulties? We use AAC. And so let's break down exactly what that means. AAC, or augmentative or alternative communication, is either a device or pictures or some form of supporting children or adults that can enhance the communication a person already has. That's the augmentative part. And this can include a child that has spoken language but might be hard to understand. Or maybe there's a motor component to it that they might not be able to get the words out all the time in every situation that they need. So they might choose to use an AAC device or AAC supports to help them communicate in different situations. In some cases though, where spoken communication is not really that best option for them, or they might feel that they communicate better with an available or different type of communication, they might choose to use their own AAC device to communicate. And so that's where you see more high-tech versions and sometimes switches, etc. So we're going to break down some different types of forms of AAC that you might see out in the community. But before we do that, I wanted to sort of note too that sometimes AAC is a permanent solution. If a child is not able to speak, we can use AAC starting at 18 months and going all the way up to year 100. I used to work in a skilled nursing facility, and I use that. We actually use more of the core board method, but I definitely use something like this with older adults. And it came in very, very handy when they were not able to produce the sounds that they needed, especially to provide healthcare. So sometimes it's temporary. We have some users, especially our youngest, our preschoolers, that they start off not talking, or as I said, 18 months, they're really not forming language and they're getting frustrated. They want to communicate, but they just can't get the ideas together or the motor component together, and sometimes even sensory components out to form the words that they need to communicate. So in those cases, AAC can be used, but maybe they start talking later. So it might be a temporary component for them too. So it's definitely something to consider that just because you see a person using AAC in one setting, it might not be the case every single time you see them. So these are some devices and some aspects that you might see. We might start with Light Tech. This is core communication boards, and I'll sort of point that up at the top. This is the core communication boards. You have picture exchange binders, ASL, sign language, and then also eye gaze boards. So people can communicate literally looking at the different pictures if they're unable to form words. And so the difference between these is that there's not an electrical component with them. It's not run on batteries. We do not have anything that is going to sort of charge these devices. Braille would also be included in this as far as light tech. It's still a way to communicate. But these come in very handy, especially if you have a situation where taking an iPad or taking a device with you is not always feasible. So this is a great way to communicate without the electricity. Now, mid-tech are GoTalks, which is the device that's in the middle. The other three components are switches, and that can be used to make choices or to tell someone definitely stop. That can definitely be a very good choice to use those switches with, but these are usually a bit limited as far as the vocabulary goes, and is used for, in this case, it's only 9 words, or actually in this case 12 words that would be used in a GoTalk, but they can go up to 32. But it's not something that has a robust communication system, and that's what we really want for our kids or anybody using AAC. We want them to have that robust communication system where they can interact and do everything that they need to do with communication. So we might see high tech. And this is where we have our iPads that have different programs on them, like Proloquo or LAMP. So there's an entire system that's involved to create language for the student. You might have communication systems like Accent or a touch chat, and we even have like some really impressive technology like an eye gaze system where you might use partner assisted scanning to make choices as you're going along. So these are a variety of different things that you might see as far as AAC goes. In Hanover, many of our students, we start them off on a core board initially, and I'll get back to this. And this is sort of where we begin. But sometimes this is where we begin, where we only have 2 choices, and we only have a stop and a go to sort of help the child to make the decisions, because we're starting vocabulary. If the child has nothing, we gotta start somewhere, and sometimes stop and go is a really good way to do it. And we build it. So we might add more words. As they get more proficient, we increase them, and so we can flip them back and forth. And sometimes we keep on moving. We go through the core boards, which have more words on them, until we get to that point of their device where they can carry it around with them, and we have some that first screen is 144 words on one page, and they can flip through and navigate to thousands of words. And it's amazing how quickly kids pick up on this because they want to communicate. Everybody does. Everybody wants to communicate and make that connection. Okay. So why does it seem difficult for AAC users to communicate? Sometimes they're ignored because they don't speak, especially if they're using low tech, which does not have that sound generating piece of it. They sometimes are just flat out ignored. It's hard to get someone's attention if you're not speaking all the time, unless you sometimes act out, or if, I know sometimes our kids do that, or sometimes they might try to get their attention by vocalization or pulling on something, but it's hard to get someone's attention if you can't say, hi, I need some help here. So, and it takes time really to create a message. If you have an AAC user, you need to allow time for them to communicate. Something that I know I probably was guilty of, and maybe other people were too, is that just because they don't speak, sometimes people assume that they don't have intelligence. And especially in the United States, it's a fast-moving society, really, and we fall behind if we can't jump in and say something right there. So really, we assume because they're not speaking, they're not intelligent, and that is very, very far from the truth. And that sort of goes with not the typical communication interaction. Some people aren't entirely comfortable with AAC, and really, okay, if a kid's hitting a button, what do I do with that? So this is again why we thought this was a really important piece to talk about. And they're limited topics of conversation. We have some users that only like to talk about specific things, but that's something that we can work through. And then also communicate with the device and not the person. Some people sort of look at the device and expect that to be the one that interacts with them, but that's not the case. We still have a person that's trying to communicate with them. So there's a lot of boundaries with people using AAC, and so this is going to help you sort of become a bit more comfortable as far as what the expectations could be and how we can sort of bridge that gap in communication. So this is what we all are. We are communication partners in the community. We want the people around AAC users to be the ones that are interacting with them. We want everyone and anyone to be that communication partners. So we can all have that role in supporting AAC. And this is an important job because we're building vocabulary and building understanding. And we need those communication partners to help support and interact with AAC users no matter where they go. Okay, so this comes to our big question. How can we be effective communication partners? So first off, I'm going to just have a show of hands. How many people have interacted with someone that uses AAC to communicate? Okay. Was it challenging at first? Okay. I know, sometimes it's easier than others depending on the person's willingness to communicate and their comfort level too. So sometimes it can be challenging, but as long as you feel comfortable with it, this is going to help you in the long run too. So the first thing I can say, talk with the child. Okay? Greet the child, get down on their level, and allow them to respond really in their own way. So if the child is in a wheelchair, you might want to sort of kneel down next to them and sort of try to get on their level. And if you think about it, if you come up to someone and sort of lean over them like this, it's a little intimidating. So you want to make sure, especially when you are introducing yourself for the first time, try to sort of greet them. I know I've had doctors, sometimes I hate to blame doctors on this, but that have come in and they've sort of ignored the kid that's sitting there. And I mean, my child at the time is able to speak, but they're talking directly to me, even though they're the ones that are sick. This definitely happens with children using AAC too, as well. We talk to the parents and we overlook a child that has communication abilities and a device that's sitting right there. So there's a lot of different opportunities that they can use. They're definitely able to communicate using that. Now, one thing we also need to note is that we need to use slow and clear speech. And we need to give a child choices to help them really feel in control of the situation. If we're always sort of ordering a kid around, it's like, oh, you want that. Or here you go, you got Doritos for lunch today, without giving them a choice of maybe, oh, would you like pretzels or Doritos? That helps give them a little bit of control. And a good way to do that is to offer a visual. This is called a choice board. And just having that option of two can help a child recognize like, oh, I can help be in control of a situation. And that might sort of lessen their anxiety about being given something without them even being consulted. Maybe they don't like Doritos. You never know. Now, if the child is shy, stay calm, because it's going to reflect as far as how they interact with you. And try to speak to them in a really calm and steady voice. Some of our AAC users have sensory sensitivities. If you come at them, yeah, let's go. I know we're going to have a great time today. They might be backing off, especially if a child is very shy and unsure of their communication abilities. Trying to bring it down and trying to stay calm and again, speak to them slowly and clearly. It's going to help bring their anxiety level down too. And also try to make a connection with the child. And that's really important is if it's a foreign situation for them, they're not familiar about what's going on, it's a new environment, trying to make that connection and just saying something like, oh, I like your shoes, I see their Paw Patrol, and just sort of talking to them really gently and like, oh, who might your favorite Paw Patrol character be? And if they have it on their AAC device that they love Marshall, then they are going to be willing to talk to you, and you're making a connection. You're bridging a gap right there, and you've made a child feel more at ease. Now, this is also an important thing to do, and sometimes it's a little hard. Be flexible and accept all forms of communication. Often AAC users are going to choose the fastest, most efficient means of communication available to them in the moment. Okay. Now, good communication partners are going to accept it, and we're just going to roll with it. And because sometimes it would be nice if they use their device, but that's not always how they communicate. Sometimes the AAC device can get chucked at your head, which is not a good thing, but it is still communication. And so hopefully it is a redirection to say, what should we do here? And it might take, okay, we might need another visual that's not quite as harmful to help them calm down. So you might have a choice board where it says, when I feel frustrated, I might use my rocking chair to help calm down, okay? So it's giving some, again, choice in the matter, but also labeling those big feelings that our kids can sometimes have, and it helps them communicate. Hopefully, and we prefer our students to use vocalization, words, words of approximations, the actual AAC device, or photos. We'll take sign, we'll take gestures. Essentially, we're going to take anything that we can use for a child to get their message across and for us to respond. So be flexible with the forms of communication. Hopefully they're much more positive than getting an iPad chucked at your head, but sometimes that does happen. Okay. Also, one thing to note too is just because a child is using an AAC device does not mean they do not have anything to say. And that is something that is huge. Our students, our children, they have a huge amount of stuff to say. And everyone has something to say. They have ideas that are inside and they're gonna wanna get them out. So, they might appear very quiet to an observer or like they're just mumbling to themselves, but assume that they understand what is going on around them. And that's something that I want to reinforce. Just because they can't verbally talk does not mean that they don't have receptive language skills that are very uneven compared to their expressive language skills. Their receptive language, they might be able to understand full conversations, but they're learning AAC and they might be just now putting two words together. So sometimes we do have an imbalance as far as how a child communicates. So please assume that the child understands what's going on, whether you're going to a doctor's office, dentist's office, at the playground. The kids, they get it, and they can understand body language. Some need more help with it than others, but they do understand, and they can get the vibe. If you're uncomfortable with them, they understand that, even if they can't express exactly what it is, that sort of feels off, they get it. So presuming competence, that they're understanding more than what they can say, especially for an AAC user, is probably the better way to go. Okay. All right. Well, oh, good. It is actually up. Okay, took a second, but this is going to be a very brief video. And this is a great example of accepting all forms of conversation. This is an AAC user that has an AAC system. I believe that is Snap4. And but I want you to notice how many different ways that this child tries to communicate.
To find the presentation with the links to the videos used in this presentation, you can visit the Hanover County Parent-Teacher Resource Center website using the QR code you see on your screen.
He's cute as buttons. Just love him. Okay, so this is He didn't touch his device, but he did communicate. How did he communicate? To his mom.
Verbal sounds.
Yeah, we had some verbal approximations. We didn't quite get the full words out, but yeah, he was trying very hard to get those vocalization, and you could tell he was excited. What was he doing with his face?
Smiling.
Yeah, he's smiling. His facial expression, he is excited to be there.
Except for when the mixer was going.
Oh yeah, and
It's not
he
even tell.
He looked a little unsure of it at the
Yeah.
end, but yeah, but that's still communication. He is still making himself known with his facial movements. Okay, now I'm going to compliment mom also with that. What was the mom doing with the device?
Pushing the buttons.
She was pushing the buttons.
As she was saying the words.
Right, she's pushing the buttons as she's saying the words. This is called modeling. And this is a great way to help out our AAC communicators learn their device. He didn't touch it at all, but mom was showing him that this is the way to do it. And she's not doing the full sentence, right? Because honestly, for his level, as far as his communication, he's not quite there yet. But that one hit is helping him learn his device. And that's a really important part of teaching a child AAC, is that you have to model for a child that uses AAC to communicate. Think of it learning a foreign language, okay? I know for me, I took Italian for 4 semesters. It was great, loved it. Went to Italy, had no clue what was going on, okay? So it's one thing to learn it, but you have to use it to really interact and to get fluent with whatever form of communication you're using. Yes?
I have a question. So, is the board, is this an app or is this like a specific device?
This is an app on this device. This can be used both in dedicated like accents, but it can also be used on like iPads too.
They're kind of all core-based.
Exactly. Yeah, these all sort of are based around those core words, which are, say, like 250 words that we sort of all use all the time. They're also the sight words that kids learn first as far as when they're learning to read. And so it's a really great way to teach a child and to generalize a lot of language. And so that's why core words are very important and why they're very useful, especially when we're starting out learning language. Any other questions? We're gonna play it again. Okay. Now, we want to make sure that the AAC system is accessible at all times. It is the child's voice, no matter if it's a core board or, say, a dedicated iPad, etc. We want to make sure that it's accessible to them at all times. If you're ever tempted to take an AAC system away, consider what would I do if this child was verbal? It's okay to say no to a child that's using AAC. Treat them like a typical child. If they're misbehaving, you gotta say no. But at the same time, don't take their device away. Because that, again, is limiting their communication. If a child was misbehaving and, like, say, screaming, would we take their mouth shut? Absolutely not. That's not what we're gonna do. So that would be the same thing if we took their device away. So just consider that if you're tempted to take it, don't do it. But we also know that sometimes iPads don't go everywhere. They don't float well. They aren't great with shaving cream. And so what we need to do is that we have to use alternative methods to communicate. Luckily for us in Hanover, many times we try to have alternatives for children that if they have an AAC device that's dedicated, they also have core boards at home. And hopefully, like say if a battery runs down or it's not charged, we need to have that available for the child so they're not left without any type of communication at all. And if you're not sure about what that backup might be, parents are a great resource, caregivers, speech therapists are excellent as well, so just that. Now, for beginning communicators, when they're just starting out, like we saw in the video, we try to use language one level up from where they are. Nona's mom was saying things pretty slow in the video, but she was also not making really long sentences. She was modeling, again, 1-2 words. And so if a child is only using like one word, keep sentences short. I said 2 to 3 words for a child, but if you're speaking in sentences, it's sometimes harder to do. So but use short sentences in general. If you're modeling on their device, maybe 2 words. So that is something important to keep in mind. If you want a child to follow directions, give them directions in one step and then wait between the steps for them to start the action. Sometimes I know for me, like I'm thinking about getting ready in the morning and I'm tired and I blurt out like 5 different directions to my kids really quick. Very guilty of doing that. But if you want a kid to follow a direction, simplify it. Okay, go get your shoes. All right. Oh, now we need to put them on. Put on the shoes. So simplifying those directions and giving the child time to actually do it helps as far as getting the child and really meeting them where they are. Now, this one's a tough one. Wait. It's hard, isn't it? We want to fill that silence, and we want to fill it fast. So, children using AAC or children with language processing difficulties might need that extra time to comprehend whatever message you have given them. It's also going to take them time to form a response. One of the things that I like to say, I try to count to 5 in my head. And that's hard sometimes because we think about how fast we move through our daily lives. Counting to 5 seems like a long time. Now, I will be very frank. I've had some AAC users that I've asked them a question or given or commented on something, and it's taken over a minute for them to give a response back. So please consider that as you're talking to our students, that sometimes they need that extra time to really say, that was what they were saying. And then trying to find which page the response that they want to give might be. And sometimes that might be a little trial and error because they might be learning the device. So make sure if you have like a set time that you need to work with a child, like or an appointment time, make sure to schedule enough time with a child with communication impairments to allow them to have that wait time that's necessary for them to communicate. Now, this is also a very important piece, is that whatever communication that a child's giving, always attribute meaning. So if a student is exploring, the partner is sort of putting it in language for them, or expanding on that language and that utterance. So there's 2 main ways we can give meaning or communication that our students are using. I'm going to show you 2 clips of them. So these are some things that you can do as you're communicating. The first one is that we try to label what actions they're doing and really validating whatever communication that they are using. So let's take a look at this very first one. And this is a speech therapist that is very skilled with the kids using AAC. She's giving meaning. Whatever the child's doing, you're attributing meaning and you're verbalizing what the child is doing and putting it into your own words. Does that mean you're right all the time? No. But a child can correct you then. And hopefully that is in their scope to go ahead and say, no, or deny what the action was that they were doing. But this is a good way of sort of giving meaning to whatever action a child's doing. Okay. Now, this next piece, I can just bounce it out, is going to be responding purposefully. Sounds sort of good, doesn't it? But what she's doing is she's attributing meaning to that one hit that the child was doing. He's saying cake, and she turned it into an entire sentence, and he's nodding and agreeing with what she's saying. And that, again, is getting that back and forth communication. It's not one-sided. It's making the child a part of the conversation that you're having. And so that's a good way to sort of attribute meaning if they're doing this. So sometimes, especially if a kid is hurt, okay, we've all been there, we've had hurt children around us. So if they keep on saying mouth, 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 and they're hitting that over and over again, we might say, oh, it hurts. And they might be able to help figure out where on their body they might have pain. So especially if a child is in distress and they're not able to access their devices, sometimes using charts like this help. On the back is also a pain scale. This is something that Children's Hospital uses. This is taken exactly from there, but this is a good resource if you have AAC users or just kids, especially when they get very distressed. This is a really good resource to use too, as far as to really acknowledge like, okay, how bad is this hurting? And it's like, oh, it hurts more? This sounds like we might need to go home. So this would, again, be expanding that language just from one icon that you would hit. Okay. Just a second, I think I got my presentation. All right. Now, please remember, we are not mind readers. We do not know for sure what a child is saying, whether this is something that is about a pain aspect for them, about communicating with them. We don't know for sure what a child's doing. So let's talk a little bit for a second about incorrectly activating the button. Because especially if children are learning to use a device, they might hit something that they don't mean to, or they totally mean to hit that. So let's take a look. Well, Rachel Maddow is also a very accomplished AAC speech therapist. And so she is a great resource as far as if you have further questions about that. She's a good one to take a look at. But her message was huge, and that's always attribute meaning to what the child is saying to you. Whether or not you always agree with it, that's what happens in daily life. We might not always agree. We want that cookie, but it's right before dinner, can't do that. So just think about that when a child might say something that you might not always agree with. So attributing meaning is important. It sends that message of respect and value for a child's communication. It helps our students learn that words and phrases definitely can be used and mean something in specific context. And then finally, it encourages students to use their AAC system, which is, again, what we want them to do and to really make that connection and communicate. So, for everybody, these are the benefits to communication. A respected child who feels like they've been listened to. Think about that. We all want to be listened to, and we all want to be respected. By listening and connecting with a child through AAC is a huge benefit overall in using these devices. Now, better results as the AAC user has a voice in the discussion. We want our kids to have their own voice, and using AAC is a great way to get there when they're not able to produce their own. Also, smoother interactions. I don't know about you guys, I'm not a huge fan of a tantruming child. So using an AAC definitely brings down the either uncomfortableness a child might have, but it also might bring down behavior. And because a child can express what they want, what they need, when they want it. And it accurately has a response of the child's feelings. Okay, they're able to express then that they're mad. They're able to express that they're scared. And that really gives the child more autonomy within themselves. And it increases child safety. If a child is able to say that they need help or if they're in pain, this is going to increase their overall safety, and especially if they have a communication partner that is willing to listen and to respond to that, it's going to help the child overall. We sometimes have children that are reluctant to say anything if they are in pain because of their communication skills. So by using AAC, this is going to help them in the long run be healthier, safer. So it's a very important piece. piece too. So when going out, everybody needs to be responsible for the AAC. We want to make sure that the AAC, that device is always available. And we're talking to that AAC user and not just about the AAC user. And help that AAC user choose the best form of communication in whatever situation. And also, this is an important one too, make sure that AAC device leaves the location with the child, because that sometimes can occur too. Okay, so where will you see AAC? And that is the question that I want to sort of go with now. Everybody, I think, or most people picked up a core board. I want you to try it out, just for one moment, and see if you can communicate a want to a neighbor that is sitting close to you. It could be you want something to drink, you want to go, you're tired of hearing me talk, you're ready to go. Or maybe you want to go play. So take your board and turn to a neighbor and tell them what you want, so you can get a taste of using an AAC device. And that is something I wanted to sort of show you guys, that even though we know all the words on here, okay, and we can read them, a child that might be starting out with AAC, they might not have that literacy piece, and they're going solely for those icons, those pictures that are on there, and trying to find the picture that sort of best represents what they want. So if that's how long it took you guys, how long would you say, was this just a few seconds to find the words you needed? Okay. But think about it if you don't have that reading opportunity. You're looking solely for the pictures. It might take a little bit longer to find the words that you need or the icons you need. So just keep that in mind the next time that you have an AAC user or someone that's non-speaking. They might need the time to, again, process and to find the language that they need to make that statement. Does anybody have any questions?
Thanks so much for joining us today. Please contact the Hanover County Parent-Teacher Resource Center or Melinda Simon with any questions you may have. You can also visit the Hanover County Parent-Teacher Resource Center website to watch more workshops and webinars on AAC.